the monotony. And, oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. No, that's yeah, we've got some brand new artifacts that we've acquired, and we're going to be having the really great reception for everybody, and then we'll let you get an in-depth look at the artifacts. And Dana Schoaf, our director of interpretation, is going to be giving a talk about them and about the person that they're associated with. So it should be a good time.
Amazing.
And I apologize, my camera is not working, so I will just be this lovely logo.
Oh, Rachel, you're the talking logo tonight. Okay.
I'm the talking logo. I meant to grab the webcam from my desk and I totally forgot. So, but I am here.
Okay, well, glad you're here. All right, and I guess we'll go ahead and get things started. My name's Tracy McIntyre. I'm the lead educator with the National Museum of Civil War Medicine. And I'm here with my colleague, the talking logo. Rachel, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, my name is Rachel Moses. I'm the collections manager for the museum. And I am happy to be here, even though I'm a logo.
Yes, we're happy to have you. So good evening, everybody. And Carrie Fitzpatrick, I'm sorry you have a cold, but I hope you enjoy the talk. And Carrie says to good evening. She has a cold and can't talk much, but she really enjoyed the book. So that's great. And I want to now take the time to introduce our author. Thank you so much to Jill Newmark for joining us tonight. She is the author of the book that we just read, Without Concealment, Without Compromise, The Courageous Lives of Black Civil War Surgeons. And we are happy to have her here. She's the former curator and exhibition specialist at the National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health, and she has published articles in Prologue and Traces, as well as online in Circulating Now and blackpast.org. So I am happy to welcome Jill to our discussion here. And so Jill, if you want to, please take it away.
You want me to take it away, huh?
Well, I mean, if you'd like to add anything to the introduction that I gave and talk a little bit about the book, that would be great.
Well, yes, thank you. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here. And I'm kind of really excited to be able to hear a discussion from people that have read the book, and how you've interpreted it, and what you found interesting and meaningful, and what kind of questions you have. Just a little, I mean, if you've read the book, you know a little bit about the research and how the book came about, so I don't really think I have to explain that, but I'm happy to be here, and I'm anxious to hear what you all have to say and what kind of questions you might have.
Okay, great. Well, I think, does anybody have any questions up front for Jill? I know I have a few, but I'll put it out to the other members of the book club first. If anybody has anything. Oh, you got to have questions. Somebody's got to have a question. Or a comment? Anybody want to comment?
I can't believe that the book completely gave you every piece of information you've ever wanted, right?
This is Cindy. Sorry, my computer's doing an update, and if I have the video on, it totally freezes the meeting. So I'm here, but I really enjoyed this book. And to me, one of the most significant things about it is it's a story that nobody knows about. It's one of these stories that's been hidden away. And Jill, I read how you kind of got into researching this kind of by accident. And I mean, these are incredible stories. And yes, I really enjoyed getting history that we're not taught in school. I loved it.
Well, I appreciate that. And that was kind of one of the motivations, because I had done, when I was working at the library, somebody said, it was the 150th of the Civil War, right? Commemorating it. somebody said, well, I worked in the exhibition department. Anybody like working on a project like that? And I said, well, I kind of am. And so that's how the development of the exhibition came about, which was really about African Americans that worked in the medical profession. That included nurses and surgeons. And so it was kind of an interesting thing. And that's what sort of started it off. I mean, it started off when I did an exhibition with a colleague of mine on African American academic surgeons, and found out that one of these academic surgeons had been in the Civil War. And it was like, gee, I wonder how many other Black surgeons there might have been. And so, and there were, and as you read in the beginning, there were a couple of things that just nobody had ever found before, nobody had ever seen before. But I think this is a direct reflection on the fact that people that write history, that keep history, choose what they want to save, what they want to report, what they want to record. And even though we always feel that history is objective, it is not, it's subjective. And it's dependent upon how people feel about a subject, what they feel is important. And that's what gets attention, and that's what gets people to save collections and things like that.
We have a question in the comments here from Chris. She says she just found out about the book, but she's amazed and inspired by some of the historical detective work you have done to find out what you needed to know. I would love to know any more about that, digging through the archives, finding hints and connections, etc.
Well, it's I have a copy of my book here, and I just was looking for something that when we were, and I'll get back to that question, but that, let me see if I can find it. I don't know if I'll be able to find it quick enough, but having to do with history and what type of history is really decided on. I think for me, it takes a lot of effort when you're working in a subject matter that there's not a whole lot. Like, you go and you say, oh, I want to do this, and you go on this particular subject, you go to the library, you find every book you can. But in this case, there were no books. There's a small book that's published by your museum by Robert Slauson, skinny book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good introduction to find names and information. But there are some inaccuracies in that book, and it doesn't include everybody, but it did include some people that no one had known about before. So it's a good jumping off point, but you have to think outside the box, and you have to figure out where else could these pieces of information be. And I relayed at least one of those stories at the beginning of the book, finding a photograph of Alexander Augusta, and having to think outside the box and to think about, I was looking for a photograph, and this was about the exhibition I'd worked on. And, a lot of times people discount the importance of women in stories. Now, these are about Black Civil War surgeons. But Alexander Augusta's wife played a very important role in this, because she was the one that had a photograph of him and had records and salvaged his books. Some of the books that he had, she donated to the Surgeon General's library. And if you know, the Surgeon General's library became the National Library of Medicine. And what happened is the Surgeon General's library had specimens and books, and the books went to the National Library of Medicine. The specimens went to the National Museum of Health and Medicine at Walter Reed. So you kind of have to think outside the box, and you have to really look at all possibilities. I would go and look at records. So basically, when I was doing the research, say at the National Archives, I would go and I would look at these records. I wouldn't really read them. All I did is I got the folders, I put them at my desk, I had my camera, I take a picture, flip the page, take a picture, flip the page. But I would go home every time with 300 or 400 photographs. Then I would be able to go home and look at all the documents. And when you're digitizing them, you can zoom in. So sometimes, and you can change the contrast. So sometimes those that were very difficult to read, I could go in and manipulate it so that I could actually read it. So I would just go and do that because it would take too much time to actually read the documents. And so, I compiled hundreds and thousands of photographs of documents because I would just go one click, two, click, 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 and that's what I would do all day long. And then I would take them home and be able to really look at them in depth. So, and you have to be willing to, so I would look at it, I'd look at a document, I'd find one name. Then I'd have to just take that name and I do searches and look everywhere to try to piece together things because it wasn't an easy task. With all the digitization of collections, it's made it a lot easier to find things. And even though the book's written, I'm constantly doing research. Like I'll go and I'll Google to see if there's something new. Because doing a biographical type of thing, there's always something new that you can find. It's like doing family genealogy. There's always more out there.
That's for sure. Is there a particular surgeon that his story really touched you more than the others?
Oh, yes. Yeah. The one that I mean, they all are fascinating. They all are the same, but they're different, different experiences. But John Rapier Jr. is kind of one of the people that I gravitated to. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he's one of the few people where there are lots of letters that he wrote, because his family wrote letters, and his brother, I think his brother's name was James, was a congressman. So because of that, a lot of letters were kept. And Howard University has the Rapier-Thomas papers, and they have letters from in all the family members back and forth. A lot of them are back and forth as well. A letter from the son to the father and the father to the son. And I think that there were over 100, 110, 120, maybe more letters of his that I got. They scanned for me, and I transcribed all of these myself in order to be able to read them. And 19th century letters are not very easy sometimes to read, or to even decipher. So a lot of that, and the thing that was fascinating is that those letters really brought out who he was, because he talked about how he felt about things. It described his emotions. And the one letter that I found the most fascinating was written when he was at Freedman's Hospital in 1864, and he was writing it to his uncle James Thomas, I think it's Thomas, who was a fairly wealthy man, and there's lots written about him too. But in it, he talks about how excited he was about getting his first paycheck. And he was an acting assistant surgeon, and he said, and I can't wait until the next one says, Major John Rapier, and that he's a surgeon. So it was his ambition and his emotions were palpable in those words. But that letter is so full of things. He talked about the nurses and how much they worked hard. He talked about how hard he worked. He talked about having dinner with Frederick Douglass. He mentioned to his uncle, well, if you come here, it's going to be hard for you to have a place to stay because you're a black man. Kind of that was his thing. So there's so many things in this 4-page letter that it's just this. That was when I did the exhibition. If you go to the National Library of Medicine, the exhibition's still up. They have a curator's choice of objects, and that was the object I chose, was John Rapier's letter. But he died young. He died, I think in 1866 in his 30s. But he did all of these things before he even became a doctor. He was involved in trying to find a place outside the U.S. where a black person could go and thrive. A lot of people in that mindset went to the Caribbean. They went to Haiti and Jamaica looking for a place. You look in his letters, you can see how he became disillusioned with it because of what was going on there. But he became a dentist there. And then he had aspirations to become a doctor. And so this whole thing was just it's just fascinating. He filled his life with so much. And I felt that you could really get a feeling of what kind of person he was. I haven't, my dog is here, so she's visiting me. Um, so yes,
Well, that's
he's kind of one of my favorites.
that's really neat because I can relate to that because I do research about women soldiers in the Civil War, and
Mhm.
having come across the letters of Sarah Rosetta Wakeman, her letters, her personality shines through in those letters, and you really feel like she's writing to you sometimes, and you just
Yes,
feel like them as people, and so that's why she's my favorite in the research that I've done. And it's just
yeah,
it's great when these letters pop up that you see they're real
yes.
people. They're really
Letters
real
make such
people
a
with
difference. Yeah, but and the thing is that there's not that many letters that have survived from these men. That was what was interesting about Richard Green, because he wrote letters to his wife and his mother, a letter, and it was his fiance and his wife about his experiences during the Civil War on Navy ship. That was highly unusual, and it was very unusual because um, of the. It is my belief that that the Navy personnel did not really realize that he was a black man, or else he never would have been able to serve on the ship. He never would have been able to treat white patients. But still, this is still the letters of a man who was identified as a black man for a long time. And he knew that was his identity. Um, I'm going back to the very beginning when we were talking about history. And this was something that's in the book and has a lot, I think, to do with why we may not have a lot of information about these people, why there's not a lot of photographs or a lot of records that were kept. And this was actually a colleague of mine at the National Library of Medicine who said, who we are affects which issues we prioritize and our ability to comprehend the circumstances of others. And I think that's part of it. You know, we prioritize what we think is important. So people did not believe that what Black people were doing was important. So it wasn't worthy of 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 saving for historical reasons.
right. That makes a lot of sense.
Um,
Unfortunately.
yeah, I can't say that things have changed that much, but hopefully there are people out there that are actively collecting things for marginalized groups or other groups that have not been historically important to historians.
And that's what's so great about your book, because it fills a gap that,
Yeah.
especially in our museum history.
Yeah,
Does anybody have any else?
yeah. The one other thing I was going to say is that one of the reasons for doing this book was I had done a lot of research. I worked on an exhibition, but I said to myself, all of this knowledge in my head is not doing any good. It's not out there for people to see.
Yeah.
And when I did the Civil War Historians Conference with, like Margaret Humphreys was on my panel and Jim Downs was on the panel and Thalia Glunf was on the panel. And it was about if there were more Black Civil War surgeons, would the health of Black soldiers been improved? And that was the focus. And from that presentation, I was approached by two publishers. I hadn't written a single word, but obviously these two publishers understood that this was an untapped area of scholarship. And I met with the person from Southern Illinois University Press, and I even talk about that at the beginning of the book. And it was like, it kind of pushed me into it. That's what I wanted to do. And now I was being pushed into that, but I hadn't written one single word.
Wow.
And she had the good sense and thoughtfulness to say, hey, this is something that's untapped and we should grab it and publish a book about this subject. So that was my goal, is to get these stories out there because they're inspirational. Nobody really knows about them. When I would give talks, they'd say, I never even knew there was a Black surgeon in the Civil War. And I wanted to also be as factual as I possibly could. So I was very persnickety about saying something and having something to back it up. I didn't want to say something and repeat it if I didn't know that I could find some primary source that would say, yes, this happened. It's like Charles Purvis. I was looking on the internet and somebody said he was the first Black physician to attend to a sitting president. And I go, okay, well, how do you know that? Like, where's the proof? And so I did a lot of research. And when Garfield was shot at Union Station, this is who they said. So I did the search. I found an article in the New York Times that talked about the congressional hearings about the assassination and all the things that went about it and expenses. And it listed him as one of the physicians that attended to him. And I said, well, there's the first step. Then I found the congressional records where they did pay some of them, but they also gave like a shout out to a number of other physicians that had attended to Garfield, and Charles Purvis was listed there. So I felt like now I can say that because there's something to back that fact up.
Right. Susan, you got your hand up.
Yes, but I could listen to Jill all night. Thank
Tell
you
me-
so much. Hi.
Trust
I'm
me, I
Susan.
can
I'm in
talk all night
Chicago.
about it too.
Yeah. You are amazing and you're such a wealth of information. It was meant to be when those two publishers approached you,
Yes,
you know?
I think so.
But I took some notes and what I put, it was so meticulously researched. And
Thank you.
I put extensive references and probably the most well-organized bibliography I've ever seen. And I'm a retired lawyer. I'm like, wow, this is
Thanks.
good. And
Thanks.
it was funny how you said that, you know, this was something that you were thinking of and it kind of kept growing as an idea because it is such a little known chapter in the Civil War in American history. And as a matter of fact, before this meeting, I met my old neighbor and her mother down in my lobby just to say hello. And I said, oh no, I got to run. I'm going to a Civil War book club. And I told her what it was about. And she goes, just what you had commented earlier. I didn't even know there were Black surgeons in the Civil War. I mean, and then she was all interested. So it's really amazing.
Yeah.
But I have to say my hero was Alexander Augusta. He was definitely my hero. He was just so courageous and I could just picture him being so proud. And that train scenario, the story about him on the train was amazing. But two other things I wanted to ask are a couple things. How long did it take you to write the book? I would have liked to have seen a photo of Richard Green because, you know, they said he was on page 143. It said that, you know, he's got the dual racial identities. And then it it impacted his abilities. I couldn't find a picture. I even looked him up on Wikipedia.
Hold on.
Was there a picture of him in the
On
book?
page 133.
I missed.
Yeah. Look at one.
Oh, that is him. I
Yeah,
missed
that's
that.
him. Yep,
Yeah.
that's him. I'll
Okay,
have
I
to-
can see.
I'll have to tell you something interesting about that. It took me a long time to find that picture. It just so happens that he was a teacher in Bennington, Vermont. I think in Bennington, Vermont. He was a teacher first before he became a physician. And they had at the time, they would have these photo albums where there'd be a picture and then somebody would write something. Well, apparently one of the students had that and that was donated to the Bennington Museum. And that picture of him was in there where he signed it to this girl. It was a girl's book that she had.
Yeah,
But I have to tell you this. I came across Richard Green through Yale University when they acquired his letters. And then, like I said, I constantly Google, right? I came across another article and apparently I had tracked down a relative, but I never got, different relatives have different perspectives. And I didn't really ever get much, but obviously they tracked down a relative too. And that relative had a photograph of him in his Navy uniform.
Oh.
My book had just gone to print about a few weeks before that. Had it been, I would have given it to them and made them put that in. If you go to, there is a QR code in this book, and the Engaging the Civil War there should be a QR code somewhere, I think. They put in, I believe. I don't know where it is, but there's supposed to be a QR code somewhere. But I can try to send you the link. The Engaging the Civil War series, they have a website, and they allowed me to add additional material to that website, and that photograph is there. I'll try to put that link in the chat before we end.
Oh, that's so cool. And finally, I think the lighthearted, this one part, it was the best visual. I loved it. Oh, she found
Cindy,
it.
Yeah, what page is that? Oh, the introduction.
If you go to page 1, which is introduction, it's on the left-hand side.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Yeah, I knew
Yeah.
I'd seen it, so I was
So,
looking.
yeah, so there's additional information, including the photograph of Richard Green, and then there's also some information of I forget what her name is. She's a Black woman who was a physician with the Freedmen in Virginia. But
Oh, but the one paragraph that I just loved, and it just created a great visual in my brain, was on page 29, where it says, when a group of Black soldiers visited a Black church in Washington, D.C., they received a jubilant reception from church members. The Christian recorder reported that the excitement of the colored ladies knew no bounds, each trying to get a peep at the true Americans. I
Yeah.
could just see that, and and it was just very lighthearted, and I thought that was really
Yeah.
cool that you put that in there. So that was
Yeah.
wonderful writing.
Alexander Augusta, you know, in doing this, the thing that's really interesting is when you do a biography and you spend this much time. Somebody asked me how long I spent writing this book. I think, let's see, it says when I somewhere in here in 2009. Okay, 2014, I organized the panel. In 2014 is when Southern Illinois University Press approached me. So that was in 2014, and my book was published in 2023. So that can tell you how long I spent writing it. And I had done some research beforehand as well. But the thing that you learn when you spend that much time with these people, they sort of become your family. You know, you sort of feel very close to them, and you learn a lot about them. And I can just visualize, like you said, you can visualize Augusta. From everything I've read about him and everything that I know about him, I felt that he was a very elegant man, very well dressed, always on point, and that when he discussed these issues that happened to him, he always took the high ground. He said, I am an officer of the United States Army, and if I cannot wear my uniform out in public, and I'm ashamed to do that, then I shouldn't wear it at all. He wasn't saying, as a Black man, I have the right to be in the Army. He was saying, I'm an Army officer, and so I am due the respect of an Army officer. You know, yeah. So, and people that had described him always described him as being elegant and well-mannered and, you know, intelligent and, you know, all of that.
Anybody else have any questions or comments for Jill?
And well, since nobody has a question right now, the other thing that I don't know if a lot of people know about, and this is another thing where, you know, you feel close to people. There were two things that occurred related to these surgeons that occurred while I was writing this book. One of them I talk about at the end of the book, which is a professorship that was named after Alpheus Tucker at the University of Michigan, where I'm in. If you will allow me just to read this, if that's okay.
Sure.
I said, the impact these Black surgeons made and their contributions during the war can still be felt today. In 2019, the University of Michigan paid homage to one of these surgeons, Alpheus W. Tucker, by establishing a professorship in his honor. Dr. Theodore Washnia, the first Alpheus W. Tucker, MD, collegiate professor of internal medicine, explained that naming the professorship after Tucker recognizes, quote, the university's history of racism and the faculty's complicitness in that racism. Naming a professorship in his honor seemed to me to be a way to apologize for that wrong and commit to doing better in the future. It is meant to remind us that our institution, as all institutions, is imperfect and that constant efforts to live up to our democratic ideals are necessary. Progress does not happen by some invisible force. It happens when people make the effort to fight for justice. And so that was one thing. The other thing that occurred in 2023 is that Fort Belvoir Army Hospital has a Fort Belvoir Community Army Hospital was renamed the Alexander T. Augusta Military Medical Center. And every time I say that, I get chills because this, we're talking about over 150 years, 160 years, where this man is now finally getting some recognition. And it was an interesting thing. I was at the airport picking somebody else, and I'm looking at, my Facebook page and stuff. And somebody posted this thing that talked about the ceremony, renaming ceremony of the hospital. And I go, I didn't know this. So I called their PR person and I said, hey, what's going on? I just published a book that I wrote, just got published. And he's in there and he goes, oh my God, I can't believe it. So I got invited. I mean, I was invited. They said, you should come. So I went to this and it was just really moving for me to see this ceremony and see them switch the flags. And they had, who would have known that a Black Civil War surgeon would have had tchotchkes to give away, giveaways, freebies. They had pens, they had lanyards, they had, squeegee balls and stuff. And it was like, I grabbed every possible thing that I could because it was so fascinating. And then there's also the military, Mollus, Mollus, right? I forget what if you know what that is. I don't remember the acronym. I'm trying to see
It's
if I
the
can find
military order of the it's the military order of the Loyal Legion of the United States.
Right. And there's the Virginia Camaraderie, right? The Commandery.
Right. Yep.
They somebody got him inducted into that, and they created a challenge coin commemorating Alexander Augusta. So I was like, oh my God. So the guy that was in charge, I said, can I get one of those? And he sent it to me. So that's like this amazing thing that all of a sudden, the names are coming out and people are talking about it more. And that's really the gist of why I did this, because they're important stories.
That's awesome. What a great story.
Yeah. And I was
anybody else have any questions or comments?
Yeah. He was kind of like, my family member, and I felt really honored to watch this ceremony and have this hospital named after him. It's quite amazing to me.
Yeah, I was really psyched to see that they actually changed the name of one of the forts to the for Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. It's now Fort Walker.
Yes. Yeah. It's very interesting because when I was at the National Library of Medicine, we did an exhibition called Changing the Face of Medicine about women physicians in America. And Mary Walker was part of that. And we were lucky enough to get her Medal of Honor as part of the artifacts to display in our exhibition, along with, I think it was, American History at the Smithsonian has her outfit or something. So we had that on a mannequin, but it was just like to see that Medal of Honor, was just amazing.
That's incredible. There's a women's memorial at Arlington National Cemetery, and it's a small little museum at the cemetery, and they have her cane.
Ah, yes. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. There's just so many untold stories like that. And, I felt strongly. I do mention 2 Black women physicians in the book briefly, just so that, I do that also during my presentations because I want people to understand that there were women who were surgeons and did perform medical you know, they were medical personnel that served during the Civil War, whether they were included or not. It's kind of like the nurses too, you know, like, and you may be familiar with Anne Stokes, who was a Black nurse. She actually was the only one to get a pension in the Navy for her service.
Oh, wow.
And I had done a lot of research on nurses as well, which was part of the exhibition. And the interesting thing about it is that you could just tell that, you know, obviously when you go through the pension, you have to have documentation, you have to have people to write affidavits and declarations and things like that. And a lot of these women worked in hospitals. They were Black nurses. You know, nursing was different then. We all know that. But they performed nursing duties. But because they were Black women, nobody paid attention to them. And there were 3 women that were nurses in a hospital in Virginia, like in one of the churches, right? And they tried to get a deposition from the white doctor. He says, I don't know who they are. I don't remember them. I don't know their names, because they were invisible. You know, they were just totally invisible. So
One of the books that we did in this book club was Susie King Taylor's memoirs.
yes, I use those a lot for the exhibition because she's featured in that as well. But yeah, pretty fascinating stuff. And you know, you think about, you know, there's some stories on the website for the exhibition I did where there were some nurses, and you know, here's a nurse that lost her family, came from Virginia, got sick, was in the hospital, you know, and you're thinking like they just kept moving forward. And I mean, I can't imagine like going on foot from Virginia into DC, escaping from enslavement, and then going to work in a hospital, and you know, and then going out and then getting sick, and just, I mean, it's just all of them were so courageous in what they did, and their stories are just not told. And one of the things about the Black nurses is if they did not file for pensions, we would never know their stories, because they did talk about, I came from this plantation, I worked for blah, 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 I came with my family, I did this and that. If they didn't have that, their stories would be lost.
So can we expect a book from you on Black Civil War nurses now?
Probably not, but there is a good, but there's an excellent book out. Oh, geez, I can't remember her name. Jane Schultz wrote a book on Civil War nurses, which is excellent. I'm going to see if I can find, I don't know if that's in my bibliography, because I don't know if I actually used that in my thing, but I will try to see if I can find that also. But she wrote an excellent book about women women nurses in the Civil War, and talks a lot about the Black nurses. So let me see if I can find that while we're talking.
Okay.
And I'll see if I can pop it in there.
Great.
But keep the questions coming if you.
Okay. Questions, folks. Questions, comments.
I found it. Do you want me to put the link in?
Yes. Is it Women at the Front? Is the name of the book? Yes. Women at the Front.
Yeah. We actually have that in our bookstore. We offer that in our bookstore. Yep.
It's an excellent book. It's an excellent book.
Excellent.
By Jane Schultz.
All right. Great. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
And I also have, I'm going to put a link to my website.
Oh, yes, please.
I have a website, blackcivilwarsurgeons.com, and you can find information there. I try to, there's a page that just has my book talks on it. So if you're interested in looking at one of my talks, like I gave one at the, I did give one at the museum, and also at Clara Barton, you know, at the Massachusetts Historical Society. So there's a bunch of different ones that you can choose from if you're interested.
Fantastic. Well, I have a question slash comment.
Yes.
And it's not really about one of the surgeons. It's about something that I read in an account of is it Anderson Abbott.
Yep.
And you mentioned that on page 83, you say many years after leaving Washington, he recorded some of his experiences in the war. And he wrote an article called Colored Female Corporal and described an
Mhm.
encounter with a young Black woman named Julia Ann Rogers,
Yeah.
and who disguised herself as a soldier. I just want to tell you, I hit the roof when I saw this, because I collect and my friend and I give talks on women soldiers in the Civil War, and we collect any references that we can find on women
Mhm.
soldiers. And this was one we had not found before. This was
Mhm.
brand new. So
If
I
you
want to say thank you.
send,
This is awesome.
if you send me an email,
Mhm.
I'm sure I have a copy of that article.
Oh, that would be
Because
fantastic.
because his great-great-granddaughter wrote a book called oh God, hold on. It's the evening, so my memory is um Crossing the Color Line is the name of the book.
Okay.
And she actually, I've had a lot of conversations with her. She came here and talked at NLM. And she gave me all of her transcribed copies of all the articles that her great grandfather did and all of that. So send me an email, remind me, and I will go through. I have to find my hard drive with everything on it, and I'll see if I can find it and I'll send it to you.
Oh, thank you so much. That was awesome, because I mean, we were just like ecstatic over this. It's so exciting to actually
Yeah.
have her name.
Yeah, it was, I mean, he was a fascinating person too. And, he continued to do lots of things after and gave lectures, and he wrote a lot of, and I talk about that. He wrote a lot of things about science and astronomy and philosophy and about his experiences. And, I mean, that's the reason why we know of the, uh, the encounter with Lincoln, with Anderson Abbott and Augusta at the White House, is because he wrote about that story.
Mhm.
He wrote about his experience. And that's the one thing, if you read in this book about when Lincoln was assassinated and his account of that evening, um, and um, and I think I talk about the differences between his account and Elizabeth Keckley's account. And it's really quite fascinating if you go back to that to read, because both of them were there, both of them had an experience, and both of them recorded it differently, although there's some similarities. Now, I think Elizabeth Keckley did it a lot sooner after the assassination, while Abbott did it a little bit later. So, whether that affected people's memory or whatever, but that's actually a really fascinating story. And when I wrote this book, I wasn't working in an academic setting. I didn't have graduate students to like do research for me or transcribe letters. So I did everything myself. But I had an intern when I was at the National Library of Medicine. So I said, hey, look at this, look at these differences, and see if you can figure out why maybe there might be differences in their stories. And so that was really helpful for me because I wanted her to have something interesting to do, not just file and do that. And so, that's when she came back and said, well, Elizabeth Keckley was a seamstress to some of the Confederate leaders, presidents' wives and stuff, and had access to their homes while she was working and could have overheard conversations. And perhaps maybe that's why she wanted to keep a low profile about being at the Peterson house, and good, so, but I talk about that in the book, but, at least family members kept those things. So that's why the library has all his, notes. And actually his great granddaughter had some additional things that she donated to the National Library of Medicine. So they have some things in their collection too.
Nice, nice. Well, we have a question in the comments here from Mark. He wants to know where the Black surgeons got their training and what units they were attached to. I would say that's pretty much all put out in your book, but if you want to address Anything
Sure.
specifically
Yeah,
or
I mean,
generally?
it's quite interesting because it was very difficult for um, women as well as Black people to get a medical education because the schools wouldn't take them, right? We know all of that about women. So, but you would be surprised that um, some of them, Alexander Augusta had to go to Canada, so he went to Trinity Medical College. No medical school here would accept him. But Dartmouth Medical College, Yale, Cortland Van Rensselaer Creed was the first Black graduate of Yale University Medical College. You know, like I said, Dartmouth Medical College, which is where Richard Green went, and Maine, Bowdoin Medical College in Maine, the Maine Medical College. So there were, most in the East. And William Powell got his at the University of Liverpool in England. So there were a Worcester Medical College, and then there was a medical college out in Iowa called Keokuk Medical College, which is the last chapter, I think, in my book. I talk about the Iowa connection. So they had formal medical education. I don't think that the Army would have accepted any Black surgeon that did not have a formal medical education.
Mhm.
You know that and there was Martin Delaney, who was a physician, but he was not in the Army as a physician. Because when he was accepted at Harvard, but they already had 2 Black students there. But when he got there, they couldn't stand that, and they all got kicked out. So, not unusual, but I think they had to work very hard. And they had to also have been from a certain class. They all came from, I would say, mostly all of them came from mixed families where they had either white parent, Black parent, Native American parent, something of that nature. They all came from what would have considered fairly well-off families. Otherwise, they would not have been able to travel. They would not have been able to go places to get education. John Rapier wouldn't have been able to go to, Jamaica or Haiti if they did not have the funds to be able to do that. So there was some geographical freedom for them because of that. What's his name now? John Vansorley de Grasse obviously came from a fairly well family. His grandfather was an admiral in the French Navy, and his father, who was this French admiral's son, with a woman who and his mother was a woman of color. Obviously they had some money because his father, John de Grasse's father, when he was his French admiral grandfather sent John de Grasse's father to the U.S., but he worked for Aaron Burr. And so, and because he worked for Aaron Burr had a lot of land, and he gave John de Grasse's father, a piece of land, and he started to acquire more property. So they were fairly well-to-do families.
So they had a little bit of an advantage getting started.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of an advantage. I think they had great advantages for being Black families or identified as Black during that period of time. So that's definitely, Charles Purvis came from a family with his father, Robert Purvis, and Harriet Fortin, and they were well-known abolitionists. And, so, and I think I even talk about, with Purvis, some of them could easily have been identified as white, but like with Robert Purvis and his family, they chose to be identified that way when, they might not have been. I think it was like with Richard Green. Clearly, in all the census records, he came from a family, his father was identified as a Black man, so of course he was one too. But as soon as he got into the Navy and his life after, he was always identified as a white man. And I talk about whether that was by benign neglect or deliberate. You don't know. There's no way to know that. But people make choices in order to protect themselves and to protect their families and give their families a better life. And they make whatever choices they make to try to do that.
Anybody else have comments or questions for Jill?
This is just kind of an aside, but the one of the surgeons that you mentioned went to New Bern, North Carolina, and I
Yes,
go
John
down
Van-
there. Yeah, I go down there frequently to repair homes in my spare time, and
Mm.
I've never seen anything about him anywhere down there.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
that-
let me. I'm looking at the question, and there was. I'm going to get back to the New Bern thing, but Mark
Okay.
also said, what units were they attached to? Well, most of them were not attached to any units at all, and that was because the only two that were commissioned officers were John Van Surly DeGrasse and Alexander Augusta. The others were all on contract as acting assistant surgeons. The thing is that they were not out in the field except for John DeGrasse, and the reason is that white physicians would not serve subordinate to a black man, nor would they work side by side with a black surgeon. So they were assigned to recruiting stations, to black hospitals that treated the black soldiers. So they were relegated and sent to that. John Van Surly DeGrasse was the only black surgeon that served in the field with his unit, which was the 35th Regiment. Augusta was assigned to the 7th. So he was the surgeon of the 7th USCT, and DeGrasse was an assistant surgeon with the 35th. Some of them in other places may have treated soldiers from other units, but they weren't really attached to any units except for Augusta and DeGrasse. DeGrasse was the one that went to New Bern. But he was met with a lot of discrimination, mistreatment, accusations that led to him being cashiered out. And if you read the transcripts, they have the transcripts of his hearing, his hearing. It's really, it's, in my personal opinion, did not do the things he was accused of, and it was just a way of getting it out. Yeah. One of the things that I talk about in the book about this was Lieutenant Reed was one of the commanding officers, and he was suspected of being mulatto. And I did research on him, and I believe that his mother was a woman of color, but he wasn't identified that way in the Army. But a lot of people felt that he was, and they felt that he favored DeGrasse because of that. When they were at
5 minutes left if you want to come down.
I think that at the Battle of Alexei, Reed was wounded. He had mortal wounds. He was still alive. And the surgeon, the white surgeon, gave his care over to DeGrasse to go with him, to take him to the coast, to get on a boat, to go to another hospital. At the Battle of Alexei, they accused him of being drunk. If he was drunk, I do not think that the surgeon in charge would have put the commanding officer in the care of a drunk surgeon.
Maybe Kenya.
Right.
So there we have that. And I think that's the main reason why other black surgeons did not get commissions, because it was certainly easier to get rid of a contract surgeon if you didn't want them there than it was for someone that had been commissioned. And the white surgeons bitterly opposed having any black surgeon in charge that they had to be subordinate to.
Right.
And
that's why Dr. Mary Edwards Walker was only allowed to participate as a contract surgeon too, because they didn't want women in there either.
Of course. Well, of course, women could not handle that. I mean, that is the reason why most of the nurses at the beginning were all men, and they didn't want women because they said women do not, they don't have the constitution to handle that. Well, when there were no more men and all the men were needed to fight in the war, then they decided, okay, it's okay for women. and women started to do that. It's just like in World War II when all the men were leaving and they needed women to work in the factories. Well, then it was okay for women to go and work in the factories because they needed them. But then after that, no, you don't do it anymore.
Yeah,
You know, you know. So
it never changes.
no, and I totally agree with you.
Well, we just have about 4 minutes left. Does anybody else have any comments or questions for Jill before we wrap this up?
Just
Okay,
thank you
Jill.
for taking the time to put it together. With the way you described what you had to do. I mean, I love the book. It really brought alive people we didn't know about.
I appreciate that. And
Yeah.
that was the purpose. The purpose of the book was to do that, to bring those stories into the light and to let people see these stories and see what they have contributed. I mean, we know that the recruitment of Black soldiers was necessary in order for the Union to win the war, but they did serve in other capacities. And that's why it's very interesting at the beginning of Steven Spielberg's movie about Lincoln. You know, the first scene is Lincoln talking to some Black soldiers and some white soldiers. And one of them says, well, maybe someday there'll be officers and maybe someday. And so whenever I see that, I like to scream at the TV because I say, there was a major, and you know, like, but that's because the people that wrote the movie and did the movie didn't know about it because there was no way to know about it.
Right.
Yeah.
I would love to see the stories of these books become a movie.
I think Steven Spielberg needs to get a copy of your book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I you know, you think about that and you go, gee, who could play these parts, right? You know,
Right.
but I mean, I think any one of them would make a fascinating story, and you know, maybe someday, maybe someday.
Get Denzel Washington up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of considered that. I have a couple of people else in mind, but you know, we'll see. Maybe someday, maybe someday.
That would be awesome.
Well,
Well,
I do appreciate all your kind comments about the book, and you know, I wanted to create a book with stories and facts, and have people be able to reference. I had somebody read it and they go, you know, the way I can tell that a book is interesting to me is if I read something and it makes me want to find out more.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm just happy that people are reading it and they're learning about these people, and that was the goal.
well, you reached your goal and then some, and our museum is so happy to feature this book in our bookstore and the story of these folks. And we're undergoing a massive redo of all of our exhibits. And we are going to include Alexander Augusta in there. And you know, some of these other surgeon stories, because our exhibits are like 20 years old at this point. So
Yes,
we want
yeah.
to, and there's so many new stories and new people that have come forward, come out. So we're definitely going to be including
Yeah.
some of these guys in our new exhibits for sure.
Well, feel free to contact me at any time. I'm happy to be a content specialist.
Awesome.
Or, I have lots of the resources. Like I said, I have copies of lots of things, and do send me the email about the Anderson
one-
Abbott article. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I want to address Cindy Dalton has asked, are we going to do the book club again next year? Yes, we are. It's not going to be so much a book club next year as it's going to be just sort of a meet the author event, so that you don't necessarily have to read the book to take part. We're hoping that might get some more people interested who maybe don't have the time to necessarily read the book. But we will be featuring more authors next year, and probably end of December, I'm hoping that we will put out a list of the authors and the books that we're going to feature next year. And I want to thank everybody for taking part in the book club this year. I think it's been really a lot of fun. And thanks so much to Jill for taking part in our final book club of the year and with her fantastic book. And I just want to say thanks again, and I hope everybody
Thank
has
you.
wonderful holiday season, and I will see you all next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.